We will be exploring whether AI removes students from the social interactions that are needed for learning. And if our panel thinks that it does, they will consider how we might re-humanize the learning experience. I want to begin by considering what do we mean by re-humanizing and why is this needed for students? Well, education theories place emphasis on social interactions. This is the heart of the learning experience. Students learn through carrying out activities, getting feedback, mimicking other people through interactions. And these theories have been interpreted sometimes quite narrowly when AI tools are being developed. Developers can view personalized learning and feedback essentially as personalized content. Some tools might even encourage students to focus on completion of task assignments or assessments rather than by learning through engaging in social experiences. So let's explore the views of our panel by asking them, does AI dehumanize the learning experience? And today we've got a fantastic panel of experts representing education and industry. Let me introduce them, and panel, please wave as I introduce you. So Rod Bristow is a non-executive director, advisor, and former president, Global Online Learning at Pearson. Rod's also a visiting professor in the UCL Knowledge Lab in the Institute of Education here at University College London. Professor Mutlu Cukurova is a professor of Learning and Artificial Intelligence in the UCL Knowledge Lab. And Mutlu is investigating the potential of analytics and artificial intelligence to support human learning. Graca Carvalho is director of the UCL Center for Digital Innovation, and this is a partnership with AWS. Graca has extensive experience with digital accelerator initiatives. And finally, Dr. Wayne Holmes is an associate professor in the UCL Knowledge Lab. He's a consultant on AI education for UNESCO, and he recently co-authored the legal resolution to protect human rights of users of AI in education, which was recently adopted by the Council of Europe, which is a leading human rights organization. So, panel, I'm going to begin by asking each of you to make a short statement related to the question, in an era of AI in education, do we need to re-humanize the learning experience? And we're going to start with Rod.
Great, thanks, Allison. Pleasure to be part of this conversation. To the exam question, does AI dehumanize the learning experience? I want to make the argument for no, or perhaps I should say not necessarily, because the extent to which it is ultimately determined by humans. So it's up to us. And that's because teaching and learning in our education system are inextricably linked. And in that system, it is human teachers who design the curriculum and how it is delivered. And why is it human teachers? Well, I think it's fundamentally based on trust. The reason why education is not a market in the sense of sort of consumer markets is because the consumers, the people who are in need of education, who want education, are literally don't have the knowledge that they need to make the decisions. That's why they're interested in being educated. So I think this issue of trust and the decision making around the way in which AI is deployed, it's up to us, it's up to humans. So not necessarily. That said, AI is going to change a great deal, just as printing perhaps arguably dehumanized teaching when books became available to read, just as the internet arguably in terms of its scaling of that knowledge that was contained in books and in other places. And of course, AI scales the insights that are available to learners. So AI is going to change a huge amount, and that does mean that there will be the opportunity for a lot more learning to take place without any human intervention. But because the road to hell in education is paved with false dichotomies, I don't think we need to see them necessarily as either or. The question really is, how do we combine human intervention into the learning with technology intervention. And on that, we should be thinking about, well, what does technology really bring? And of course, it widens access to knowledge. And with AI, it widens access to interpretations of that knowledge in ways that humans can't do at scale. So the scale potential brought through AI and technology is incredibly valuable. And AI can widen access to other things. For example, automatically generated formative assessments to check the understanding that the learner wants to be checked, which again is much more difficult for humans to do at scale. And then in the world of high stakes assessments, AI has got potential to perhaps turbocharge what can be assessed without human bias. And let's not forget that humanization has some downsides as well as upsides. The human bias in assessment, it has historically been a problem, which is why exams were introduced in the first place. And in fact, AI has got some real challenges for assessment too, which are very, very problematic and are not really being addressed right now. So that's perhaps something we need to consider for the future. But in summary, I would say that AI doesn't necessarily dehumanize the learning experience, and that anyway, some degree of dehumanization may be necessary. The final thought I would say is that one of the things we need to be careful of with AI is this idea that with AI, just as it was often said with the internet, people don't need to learn knowledge anymore. They just need to learn skills. But of course, skills don't exist without knowledge, and knowledge is, after all, the basis of thought. So perhaps that's the most important human skill that we need to acquire.
Well, thank you. That's a super interesting idea. And our first panelist thinks that we don't need to rehumanize because of all the reasons he's explained. So I'm going to move on to Mutlu Cukurova, and we'll find out whether or not Mutlu agrees or if Mutlu has a different opinion. Over to you, Mutlu.
Thanks a lot, Allison. I think it's a great pleasure to be a part of this panel. And I mean, the question I think is a bit tricky. Does AI dehumanize learning experience? Obviously, the answer to this question depends on how AI is designed, developed, and used in the learning process. But I will try to argue it indeed might dehumanize learning, and maybe try to give a few examples of why this could be the case. So regarding the design and development, much of the AI currently society is interacting with has been developed with concrete commercial goals that have not always been clearly communicated transparently to the users, and do not always align with the goals of supporting human flourishing or improving humans' learning experience. And this might be one of the reasons why AI might indeed dehumanize learning experience. But I would like to talk a lot more about my area of expertise, which is the use of AI in education as an academic. And I would like to think that at the conceptual and theoretical levels, most goals are indeed aligned with improving the learning experience. This is why much of the initial focus in the field has been on attempts to create systems that are potentially as perceptive as human educators. Yet, due to the challenges associated with modeling the complexity of human learning as a whole, this line of work in the field often ends up being mainly able to effectively model only a fraction of knowledge components in a specific subject area as part of an intelligent tutoring system or as part of an adaptive learning platform. Now, these can be very powerful tools in terms of supporting students' knowledge acquisition in a specific area. And there is indeed good evidence at individual studies levels, at meta-reviews level, to show that they can achieve comparable results to average human tutors in the delivery of knowledge acquisition in a particular subject area, such as maths or certain aspects of algebra. But many other aspects of human learning experience are very difficult to be modeled in that way, because they don't really fit into the principle of compositionality, which is the principle that the meaning of a complex learning construct is determined by the meanings of its constituent parts, and there are certain rules that are used to combine them, and if we add them with these rules, that would lead to the learning construct that we are trying to model. Therefore, they're often very limited in terms of what can be supported in human learning and tend to be only sticking to a certain parts of knowledge components. So if AI in education is considered in this narrow sense, in my opinion, as a vision, as lonely individuals working on their own with an AI system, and then AI can indeed dehumanize learning experience. Such an approach might lead learners to prioritize information gathering and declarative knowledge acquisition over tacit knowledge and perhaps wisdom, which comes through rich experiences in the real world. If these systems are considered as a replacement for human interaction with each other, and indeed with the real world, then the knowledge that comes through experience and practical acquisition of an embodied skill can be replaced with tokens of representation that are far off the actual constructs that we are interested in students to or learners to develop. In such an approach, even for those constructs that can indeed be broken into small, measurable knowledge components, more mechanistic measures of how much, how fast, or how precisely a knowledge component is completed might be prioritized, yet in learning experience, more and faster acquisition of a knowledge component, or even the more precise yet not flexible application of a knowledge component do not always lead to enhancements in terms of the quality of learning. So such measures, I think, are brilliant for measuring the capabilities of machines, yet they can be very detrimental for the quality of learning experience and might indeed dehumanize it. In addition to this, there are significant issues associated with the use of AI, not the development and design, as I have been covering, but there isn't really much time. I think it's really important to consider the use of AI approaches in which human agency is not threatened, and important cognitive tasks are not necessarily always offloaded to an AI agent, because that can be very detrimental to human flourishing. I think the side effects of AI use cases have been quite surprising in many other areas, like the impact of use of GPS on human spatial skills or the impact of pilots' over-reliance on autopilots in planes during emergency situations. I think the last thing we would want for all of us to autopilot our learning experience into AI agents and to only discover that one day our important cognitive skills have been deteriorated to a degree beyond recovery. Having said all of this, I would like to, conclude by saying that I'm not really sure many academic researchers of AI in education would necessarily agree with this vision of AI for learning. Instead, many of us, including myself, we argue for a human-centered approach to the design, development, and deployment of AI for learning. AI for learning should always be putting humans at its center, creating opportunities for a dialogic exchange and collaboration between AI systems and humans that would prioritize the enhancement of learning experience and human flourishing. So it might indeed dehumanize learning, but I don't think this is the way that we should go forward.
Okay, thank you, Mutlu. That was very in-depth consideration of how these tools support learning. And I'm going to now go to Graca. Graca, you're at the heart of startups and entrepreneurs and people who are developing education and technology. So what do you think about this idea of dehumanizing or rehumanizing?
Hi, hello, Allison. Thank you very much for having me in the panel. And it's very interesting to be able to share the perspective of the technology through the innovation eyes and how some of the research being done. And I'm in the boundary between the Department of Computer Science, where I am host at the AI Center, where a lot of the foundational research takes place at UCL, and the UCL Center for Digital Innovation, where we focus in one of the domains being digital health with the partnership with the Institute of Education and the Knowledge Lab. So it's actually seeing the merge of this, the technology seen from a very fundamental point of view, as well as its application in concrete products and services being materialized by the startups that we are supporting. I think that, going back to Rod's point, what is the short answer to the question, if AI is dehumanizing the learning experience? I think that being an engineer myself and being a computer science, I have to say that no, otherwise I think that we will not be able to go and actually perform our jobs with motivation. However, I think that we also need to consider our responsibility in understanding how technology is actually being designed, used, and deployed. And that's, very much tying up what Mutlu and Rod have already said. I also think that, and I will elaborate this a little bit, I also think that the topic of AI use in education is actually forcing us to a higher level of questions in terms of what is the purpose of education, what is the learner's motivation of education, what is the role of the stakeholders in the education ecosystem. And that I think it requires, a quite in-depth analysis. If we consider that the learning experience actually comprise a very considerable latitude of experiences, both traditional in the classroom, in the facility, in the education facility, but as well non-traditional experiences, I think that we can look at two different domains. One is looking at AI as a human augmentation technology, and this builds very much into what Mutlu has described in the role of human-computer interaction and how some tasks can be automated, assisted, done faster, better, with higher precision. However, what we also need to understand is that the human learning actually needs repetition, needs failure, needs experience, observations, and practical setups to be able to progress. We might be able to minimize some of the more repetitive tasks, but we should not. We still need to understand where is the boundary where human cognition is going to be impaired because we're not repeating or attempting enough to acquire or to do something. I also believe that in terms of an aspect that is really important, and I have been working with Professor John Shaw Taylor as part of his UNESCO work, all the area of personalization of education. I think it's really important. And from that point of view, it's not going to dehumanize. If we actually can shape the content to the individual student needs, abilities, interests, and by that be motivating to lifelong learning behaviors. I think that there's a very human aspect of that, and very, very important in terms of sustaining lifelong learning in a scalable, cost-effective way to a very large number of students and human beings. Something that I actually went as part of the preparation of this panel, but not only because of that, because I'm also a governor in a school that asked me to look at the topic and advise the leadership of the school. I was looking at precisely the ChatGPT comments on using some of the generative tools in education setups. And it explicitly mentions that the tools like ChatGPT can often generate answers that sound reasonable. They cannot, however, be relied upon to be accurate. So when we have a technology provider stating something like this, and knowing, as Rod has said, that in countries like the UK and in Europe overall, education is still in the hands of human beings who have the responsibility to actually understand the limits and the boundaries of the technology that we have today. So there's a responsibility that is very much associated with the trust that is put in the adults, if we're speaking about children's education, but also in the trust of public entities that indeed need to provide this level of governance that is fundamental when you use technologies in such fundamental roles in society like education. So I will address this more in terms of the what can we do, but I think that the trust is associated with governance, and that should not be underrepresented. Final point, I think that all of these technologies actually give us an opportunity to rethink learning experiences. And as an engineer, I like to see this as, you know, a very prolific field of innovation and a very prolific field of transformation in the education practice, and some analysis as well of its goals. In terms of a final point, I must say that I was very impacted by the fact that several literature points that our education system currently actually dehumanizes and actually turns off some of the unique capabilities of creativity and critical thinking that we have very present in young children, but that the way we actually build our education system somehow tends to favor a different set of skills that might be less human than actually machine skills. So I would like to think that the AI and use of technology like AI will force us to go back to basics and think about what are indeed human skills and capabilities, and how our education systems and tools and environments create and augment those very human skills. That's all.
Well, thank you for that. So there's a challenge there in terms of current education, and is it in fact already dehumanized by some of the limitations that we have in regulation and so on. I'm going to move on to Wayne Holmes. Wayne, I see that you have an image behind you where, well, you can maybe explain that to us, and also explain your thinking about whether AI dehumanizes education.
Thanks, Allison, and like everyone, thanks for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. My argument is simple. AI doesn't have to dehumanize education, but the way it's currently being used, it's currently been developed, for me, it's definitely going in that direction. And it's interesting, a couple of the points that have already been made in this talk, the focus has been on learning. There has been some reference to education, and it's interesting to me that AI in education, is actually, it's all about the qualification function of education, the transmission of knowledge and skills, and it actually ignores other key education functions such as socialization, enabling learners to become part of particular social, cultural and political orders, and individuation, developing autonomous and independent thoughts and behaviors. Those are quotes from the researcher Bristow, who I think has a lot to say in this space. So for me, the project of AI Ed that we've had for 40 plus years has been fascinating, some amazing work, but my concern is that it's been focused on the wrong thing. It's actually been focused on automating teacher functions with the assumption that AI-enabled tools can, in certain circumstances, teach better than human teachers. So in other words, it's been dehumanizing teaching all the way through, rather than focusing on supporting teachers and supporting the teacher-student human relationship. And in fact, today, there's actually very little research, and I can't find any commercial products that are genuinely designed to support or augment, as the word has been used today, teachers. But also, most current AI Ed, from my position, undermines the agency of students. So when students engage with an AI tool, the tool is designed to take the decisions, spoon-feeding information, avoiding failure, and they actually work towards the homogenization of students, all passing the same exams. So in other words, in my opinion, current forms of AI Ed do dehumanize students. But that homogenization question brings up what Graca referred to, the personalized learning. And I have to say, I think this is a bit of a myth. There's no opportunity really to discuss AI in education today without someone claiming that AI can enable personalized learning. The logic being We can get personalized recommendations on Netflix and Amazon. So the question is, why can't we do that in education? But for me, this Silicon Valley neoliberal approach is flawed for so many reasons. To begin with, it forgets that good teachers, by definition, personalize their teaching moment by moment without the use of any technology. Second, it ignores that the so-called personalized learning typically disempowers teachers and undermines student agency. Third, it undermines collaboration and the other social interaction elements of teaching and learning, the human connection between teachers and students and between students, all of which is essential if we're to avoid dehumanizing teaching and learning. And fourth, in any case, it isn't even really personalized. Only the learning pathways are personalized by these technologies, not the learning outcomes. So no AI tool today that I'm aware of helps students to achieve what they want to achieve or to self-actualize, to become the best that they can become. Instead, the focus of most AI ed, the commercial AI ed, is on making learning more efficient, preparing students for passing their exams, homogenizing them into the same educational outcome boxes, which for me, again, represents the dehumanization of teaching and learning. Now, the reason why so many today are talking about AI in education, and the reason we have so many experts, not the people on this panel who are all experts, but in the world out there, we suddenly have lots of experts. And it's because of text gen AI, it's because of ChatGPT. It's fascinating, it's complex, especially given the common belief that Gen A actually understands what it's generating, which it certainly does not. So writing is a key part of how we think, how we organize our thoughts, how we clarify ideas and think critically. So it's been argued that Gen AI is writing without thinking. So for this reason and others, Gen AI could reduce our ability to think critically and to express our ideas independently. It could lead to a decline in writing skills, as Mutlu mentioned. We don't know. But it could also lead to a devaluation of human expertise and educators. And so it could diminish the status of teaching as a profession. Finally, for me, the cognitive effort required for writing is essential for mental growth. And outsourcing this entirely to AI, as is happening in too many circumstances, might lead to what's been called cognitive stagnation, which I would argue as an academic is not a good thing for students. So again, the use of Gen AI in education could lead to the dehumanization of both teachers and students. Now, OpenAI's caveat that their tools can generate inaccurate and error-full stuff, for me, it's a bit like the tobacco industry stating that smoking kills. It's just a way of getting out of their responsibilities. So finally, data. Now, data is the lifeblood of much AI today, and it can help us potentially better understand what's going on when learning is happening. However, the problem is that the data that we can collect only reflects a fraction of what happens in education. In no way does it represent a holistic picture of learners. Now, that doesn't have to be a problem if we're using that data for research, but it is a problem, in my opinion, when policymakers and school leaders make big decisions based on what are inevitably partial data, which they are increasingly doing around the world. They're citing evidence-based decision-making, yet they have very little understanding of the limitations of the available data. So typically, we only have data when students engage with electronic systems. We don't have data about when they read a paper book, when they learn outside of classrooms in the field, perhaps, when they speak to the teacher, or when they engage in collaborative activities. And at the same time, the overemphasis on data and metrics, on standardized test scores, on quantitative assessments, is at the expense of holistic learning and personal growth. It's also a normalization of surveillance culture in classrooms, which for me is a key way to dehumanize teaching, learning, and education. So in conclusion, I still believe AI doesn't have to dehumanize education, but the way it's currently being used and developed is definitely going in that direction.
Well, thank you, Wen. You made a few really interesting points there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the panel, so you've outlined the points. You've pointed to some ways forward, but I'm going to go through the panel again and ask everyone, so what should we do and how do we go forward? And what I'm going to do is go through the panel in reverse order this time, which means, Wayne, that you're the first to respond. You talk about this cognitive stagnation, which sounds like something that we absolutely have to avoid. So in your opinion, what should we do?
I think it's really challenging because, as Mutlu mentioned, the pressure from the commercial sector is enormous. And there are hundreds of tools out there now that have been multi-million-dollar funded, and policymakers are buying them in big time and implementing them in schools. But the point I would make is that we have no, and I emphasize the word no, independent evidence at scale for the efficacy, the safety, or the impact of these tools on educational settings. So that's the situation we're in. The question is, what do we do? And this does give me an opportunity to talk about the Council of Europe work I'm involved in. In some countries, such as France, if you have an ed tech product that you wish to sell into schools, you first have to get that product, I'm not quite sure the phrase, but approved by the national government. It has to go into a process which can last between 15 and 18 months, where you are expected to demonstrate its efficacy and safety. I think that's a good thing. Before we inject medicines into our children's arms or give them pills, we insist that those medicines go through a very thorough, rigorous testing and checking process to ensure that they do what they say they do, and they do it safely. So here we're talking about children and other learners' brains. We're trying to affect their cognitive development. I can't see why that's any less important. And so I would argue that we really do need to think about the regulation of these tools. At the moment, very often, a teacher meets somebody at the BEC conference, they like the look of the tool and bang, it's in the school. But this is not the way we should be doing this. We need to have robust standards. So the work of the Council of Europe is a long process. So far, what we have achieved is that the 46 member states, ministers of education, have said, yes, you now need to develop this legislation. So that's the work over the next 18, 24 months. So we shall see. But the whole point is to facilitate innovation in education by ensuring that it's safe for teachers and learners.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. I would encourage everybody who's participating in this, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat, or if you have any specific comments, which I will come to later, then put them in the chat. And I'm going to ask Graca. Graca, you talked about human augmentation and how tools could be developed in terms of augmenting humans rather than necessarily providing personalized learning or all the other things we talk about. But you also talked about trust. So what do you think are the main things that we need to do?
Yeah. So actually, in terms of augmentation, I think it's a very interesting area of research in the Department of Computer Science in the AI Center, is how to actually insert human steps within the algorithm checking. And there are different ways and different approaches on how to do that. And this is all towards the explainability and interpretability of AI that indeed are, I think, fundamental practices that we need to start implementing. And this is in terms of what we can do. I think that there are a number of parallels that we can draw from some of the other development domains in technology in computer science. And if we think about the approach that has been taken around security, the security matters, there's a lot of it that we can learn in terms of engineering practice, in terms of developing engineering educational tools that use AI, and principles like security and privacy by design should also apply to all AI tools. And this human-centered AI that actually has into account the explainability and interpretability of AI and machine learning, I think are fundamental engineering values and principles that should be present in these tools. I also, I must say that we try to understand a little bit better what the innovation actually looks like, what products are being developed by a lot of these startups, and we have already organized twice, and we're going to do that again this coming year, an event during the London EdTech Week to understand what exactly is happening and what can a higher education institution offer to help these tools be safer and actually be more fit for purpose. And I must say that it's unanimous. The point that Wayne points that there is no evidence of actually what is the quality, the effect of some of these tools. That is absolutely sure. A lot of these startups have technical know-how in terms of the tools. They have some understanding of the very low-level needs of objectives that they want to achieve. Some of them, as was pointed out, is learning faster to pass the exam. But there's no understanding on the underlying consequences of this practice, especially when used in repetition and when used over a long period of time. So one of the areas that we're trying to address, and I think that as UCL we could actually think about that, is actually create the same way that there is certification labs for other technologies. When was mentioned, for instance, medical devices, where we indeed have that's the other area that our innovation center